Welcome to Defying the Odds podcast, the podcast where grit, resilience, and drive take center stage. I am Leonovsky, political refugee from the Soviet Union, and now professor of entrepreneurship.
I'm Victor Salcida, a formerly incarcerated individual turned software engineer and social entrepreneur on a mission to empower justice-impacted individuals through technology, education, and systemic change.
In 2018, I was fortunate to have Victor as one of my students while he was incarcerated. Fast forward, we're both free to find opportunities, challenge stereotypes as business partners, community leaders, and co-anchors of this life-changing podcast, where we dive deep into powerful conversations with guests who have shattered their own barriers and defied their own odds.
On each episode, we're here to bring you not just stories, but strategies, real tools to help you take on challenges in life, business, and beyond.
So tune in, be inspired, and get ready to defy your own odds.
This is Defying the Odds podcast, where no challenge is too great to conquer.
Let's go. All right. Victor, how you doing this week? Hey, happy Friday to you too. So I'm going to ask you the question. How have you defied the odds this week? Right, and for those of you who don't know, Victor is located in Texas. So, what was the weather like? Hopefully, not too hot. All right. Well, for me, there are a couple of things I did to defy the odds. One is I really used the power of network this week, which is one of the key things that I always talk about as a way to defy the odds is to lean on your network and lean on your community. And I got together with one of my friends and mutual friends, Nick Anderson, and his consulting company, and started to see a completely different way of engaging in business and supporting entrepreneurs and small business owners in how they manage their business, how they build their business. And for me, defying the odds was seeing myself as the C-level executive, a fractional C-level executive that I haven't really thought of, and that's one of the key elements I always find for me is defying the odds is more than just kind of like, hey, here's the odds against you and how you overcome it, but many times the odds are really inside your head. And so to see and reframe my own vision and what I am capable of has been one of those. It's been one of those moments this week when I'm like, wait a second, I have been I have not been thinking about it in quite the right way. There's way more here than I can do. So that would be one way I defy the odds this week. All right. So we have a guest like we always do, and I am really happy to introduce him. This is Andy Honig. I'm going to introduce him in a second. He is a tech executive turned small business owner and has some pretty amazing stories. So, all right, Andy, welcome to the stage.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah. And we've known each other for quite a while in different elements, different kind of environments, which we'll talk about later. But I am curious to know for you. Let's start out. Just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then answer the question, which is, how do you defying the odds for yourself?
Sure. So my name's Andy Honig. Out of college, I was a tech guy. I worked for the National Security Agency in computer security for almost a decade. And then from there, I went to work for Google in security for a decade and had a pretty successful career there. And then when marijuana was legalized, I applied for a license and sort of stumbled into being a small business owner that I've now grown into 5 locations and a little over 100 employees. That's been very, very successful. In terms of how do I define the odds, I mean, I think, anything worth doing has challenges. And there's definitely times when you hit those challenges and it's like, all right, this is not going to succeed. This is the challenge that's going to kill me. This is the challenge that's going to end this endeavor. And define the odds is resetting yourself, taking that moment, says, I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to find a way. And that doesn't always work out, but a lot of times it does. And those hurdles that make someone else not succeed, you see those and be like, oh wow, this is a hurdle that could have ended my journey. And when you clear that, it's certainly a good feeling to kind of beat those chances and beat those hurdles. And as a small business owner, there are many of those.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how this week, how did you defy the odds
this week?
Yeah, if you could think of that, and then we could talk a little bit about the big way.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to think, to be honest, one of the things about being a small business, there's so much every day. It's almost hard to remember Monday by the time you get to Friday. I'd say, I had a pretty big win on a negotiation with somebody. I don't know how to, it's probably going to be pretty boring in legal details, but essentially there was a lawsuit from years ago with a Canadian company that sort of destroyed one of my buildings. And they sort of have been stiffing us in the money. And it's been this sort of back and forth to try to squeeze some money out of it. I got another chunk of money out of them this week. But they basically rented my building and totally gutted it. And that was about 3 or 4 years ago. And I spent, a little over $1 million fixing it up. And then there was a lawsuit, and then they sort of didn't really have the money. So there's a negotiation where if you ask for too much, they'll just declare bankruptcy and fold. But if you ask for just the right amount, you might actually get it from them. And it's sort of this dance that we play. And I got a little more money from this month.
All right, cool. Well, I love your idea of the definition of defying the odds, specifically about overcoming, the hurdles, right? There are always these hurdles that other people fail to get around, and you clear, right? And you don't know if you're going to, but you're going to try anyways.
Thanks. Yeah, and it's the ones that you don't see coming that are the worst, like the power outage last week. One of our stores was out of power for 9 days. We were one of the last. I was checking the power outage numbers, and 99.9% of people had power back, and we still didn't have power. And it was our busiest week of the year. The week of Thanksgiving is actually the biggest week for marijuana shops of the entire year. So first we ran in the dark for a little while with we wrote down what people bought, and we didn't even use the registers. And then finally we begged, borrowed, and stole a generator, and we got as much as we were up and running on the generator. And that was quite an adventure.
That's defying the odds if I ever hear. That is pretty cool.
Yeah, we had an employee camp at Home Depot until someone returned a generator, because I figured somebody's going to return a generator because most people have power. So they stayed there. So when someone returned it, they would immediately buy it. And after about 3 hours, somebody was able to pull that off.
Oh, wow.
That is such a cool story.
Defying the odds.
Wow, that is wild. And it also brings me to that other story. How do you defy the odds? First of all, you show up.
Yeah. It's a really good
Uh,
start.
Victor, what do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I was more curious about your background and just your trajectory onto how you got into the cannabis industry. I find it very interesting, and I'd like for our listeners to kind of learn more about how that came about, and like what was the decision making process when you're making the decision.
Sure, I can talk about that for a few minutes. I'm a reader of rules as just something I kind of like to do. So in 2012, there was Initiative 502 in Washington State to legalize cannabis, and I read it. I was like, well, I'm gonna have to vote for this. Let me read it. And the summary was kind of interesting. So I was like, all right, let me read the full thing. And for my reading, I was like, all right, these retail licenses are going to be valuable, and they're going to be lotteried off. So I don't know anything about retail, never worked in retail. I don't really know anything about cannabis. I tried it once in college, didn't really like it. But it seems like these licenses are going to be valuable. And I grew up in the great state of New Jersey where liquor licenses are still extremely valuable and extremely limited. So it sort of, struck a chord with me there. So I was like, I'm going to apply for one of these. And it was $250 application fee and a 1-page form. I was like, I assume everybody's going to apply for one of these. This seems like a no-brainer. And if I get it, I could sell it for, I don't know, maybe $50,000. Like this could be this huge win. You might, it's a lottery, but it's got a pretty good out. It's better than the real lottery. And then, well, as I thought, lots of people applied, not nearly as many as I thought. And then the liquor board was like, whoa, we've got too many of these applications. We're going to have to filter this out. We got to make it harder because you had to put an address where you want to be, but you didn't have to know that address. You didn't have to own that place. You didn't have to have a lease. You just had to list an address. You didn't even have to even talk to the landlord. So I just put an address on a piece of paper. And the liquor board was like, okay, we've got too many applications. We're going to filter it to only people who have a letter of intent to lease or a purchase and sale on a property. And that was kind of the first big decision point. It's like, do I want to do that extra effort? Right? Because there aren't that many places where it's legal to sell from. And it was really hard to figure out because you got to be 1,000 feet from every school, park, transportation center, daycare. So there's, in the city of Kirkland where I live, there are, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000 plots of land. I don't know the exact number. And there's about 70 that were legal to sell cannabis from. That's a pretty small number. And 20 of those are owned by Costco. So Costco's not going to let you lease to them. So do I want to try to find this out? So we did, and we made a list of all 70. We went knocking on doors, and I just made unsolicited offers to buy people's property or rent space. And the bigger the property, the more likely they were going to tell you no, because it's a federally illegal, activity. So I just started saying, would anybody lease to me? And there was a guy who was like, well, I'm not sure if I'll lease you, but I'll write you a letter of intent to lease. So he wrote me a letter of intent to lease, and I think he was legitimately considering leasing to me. Without him, I'd never opened my shop. And he wrote me this letter, and then we got this letter, and then all of a sudden, the 50 or 60 people who were applying in Kirkland was down to 11. So most of those people, that's already defying the odds. Like most of the people didn't take that second level of effort to get a real address. That gone from 50 or 60 down to 11. And then the lottery came out and they were going to give two licenses out. And I was actually number 4. So I didn't win. But then, as the state was doing its due diligence, learned that some people, their location wasn't really real, or their letter from the landlord wasn't really real. And the people who ahead of me who were 1, 2, and 3 all were eliminated because they didn't have all their ducks in a row. And then it became time to me to open a store. And then I had this license. And I was like, well, am I really going to open a store? Or am I going to sell this now? And I looked around, and there were people selling them for pretty good money, more than I thought they would sell for. And I sat there and kind of talked to my wife, went back and forth. And we talked with some people about selling it, but it was tough because like the conditions were weird and it's hard to know how to value it. It's like, we could probably figure out how to open this. And then we needed to find a real location because the person who wrote us the letter didn't actually want to lease to us. And we ended up buying a building and borrowing money from, when people were excited about this, it was easy to borrow money. So I borrowed more money than I ever imagined anyone would ever lend me. And I bought a building in Kirkland. And then we were like, all right, well, we could figure this out. It's probably a little bit, overconfident of me, but it all worked out. So I guess it was the right amount of confidence. And we were one of the most successful stores in the state. We were the 5th highest store in the state at some point. And then as more stores opened, we fell back a little bit, obviously. Although we're still in the top 20 for that location, I think. And now we've got 5 stores and about 100 employees. that's kind of how
That's awesome. Well, for those who don't know, the stores, the small business that Andy's talking about is called Higher Leaf, and maybe we could we'll put the link to the business in the notes for the podcast, and maybe Victor can put it on the screen here. But Andy, what is the email of the, or what? How do people find you online?
Higherleaf.com is our address.
Mhm.
We're in Kirkland, Bellevue, and Redmond. So if you just search for the name in a Google
There you
search,
go,
Kirkland,
Bellevue.
Bellevue, Redmond, you will find us.
Yeah. The east side of Seattle, Seattle East Side, as we call it here in Washington. That's awesome. I really love the idea of like that, uh, how you defy the odds with the license itself, right? Is that the biggest thing? It sounds like you made the effort. You made the
Yeah.
effort, and other people didn't. And then you also were real, right? Even though, like you follow the steps, even though some people didn't, right? The people who
Yeah.
won, they didn't do the job. They didn't do the effort.
Yeah. And they didn't, I mean, maybe they didn't understand what they did wrong. I mean, because there are a lot of people who they tried, but there was a daycare that they didn't know about that was too close, things like that. But you got to
Right,
do
but
that
that's
due
what I'm
diligence.
saying. You put in the effort. You read the small print. You put in the effort, and you showed up, just like you did with getting your employees to go camp out at Home Depot to get the to get the generator to get your store powered up. So pretty damn cool.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty gritty, and the thing that I thought was like, you didn't have a lot of experience doing a lot of this stuff, but you're willing to put in the work and research and just get vulnerable and get your hands dirty and just like try to figure things out on the go. And that's the type of attitude when you need to defy the odds. And yes, this is a great example of that.
All right. Well, so tell us, man, how are you? So how has it been since then? And how did you continue to defy the odds with Higher Leaf?
Yeah, I mean, I think the trying to run a business when you've never run a small business before is certainly a challenge. I think one of the biggest things has been the regulatory compliance issue. I think it's a very new industry. I think the government pays attention to us, both the local governments and the state government. So I think that's been a challenge. And if you look around in my industry, that's been one of the things that has caused a lot of businesses to fail, is their inability to keep meticulous compliance with all these rules and various city and state regulations. I think another one, which is one that doesn't get enough attention for small business, that I think I'll talk about a little bit, that I think has gone really well for us, is I didn't have the money to do all of this. I had to buy a building. I wasn't in the position to buy this building. So I have partners, like a lot of small business people do. And I will tell you, when I look around my industry, the number one thing that kills businesses, and there's other industries too, is partners that can't get along, and partners that end up in fights. And I've seen it in businesses that are failing. I've seen it in businesses that are printing money. I've seen it all across the board. So I think, the number one thing that I say, you talk about a lesson, I think being careful who you choose as your partners, and being understanding and making sure you're always on the same team with your partners. Because I can't tell you how many incredibly successful, super money making businesses I've seen fall apart because they can't get along, and all the money gets spent on lawyers, and it all goes to shit. And they have this $1 million opportunity that they've built together as a team that they piss in the toilet and becomes worthless because they can't get along and they're so angry at each other. So I think that's, again, we could talk about defying the odds, but if you look at the numbers, the number of small business partnerships that go south is actually very, very high. And it's one of my partners likes to say, Bill Gates and Paul Allen created more wealth than any two in the world. And there were times where you hear Paul Allen feeling like he got screwed in the deal, right? Here's the most successful partnership in the history of the universe. And still someone feels, now they made it work, they didn't, but someone still feels like they got screwed. And in a partnership, that might happen, just like in a marriage. You might feel like you got the short end of some sticks, but you got to still work together and be a team.
Yeah, you got to work together. So yeah, you but and your partner, like, who are your partners? I know one of your partners is your wife, which is if
Yes.
if there is a common if there is one common statement in small business, and I've been a serial entrepreneur myself and professor of entrepreneurship, and I work with startups all the time. And one of the things, one of the adages, don't go into business with your spouse, your best friend, or your family member, because you might not have them at the end of the deal. And but that you defying the odds there as well. And so, talk to me about your partners and how did you decide to go into business with your wife as a partner, as well as the other partners that you found?
Yeah, so I've broken most of those rules you just listed. Just are
Yep.
there. Obviously, my wife and I work great together. I think we have a fantastic marriage. I'd marry her 100 times in a row if I could. And that's, I don't think we intended to necessarily be in business together, but it just works out, right? I mean, a marriage is a partnership. I think if you do have a strong marriage, I think you should be able to work with your wife. But again, everyone has different parents, and marriage means different things to different people. One of my other partners is actually my brother-in-law. And the main reason he's my partner is he had the money. He's an active investor, and he had the money to buy this building. And that was something that I needed. And he's a great partner. He's mostly a silent partner. He doesn't do a lot. And then the other partner is an associate of his, which kind of came with the deal of bringing him into the deal. So the adage of don't do business with family, I think is probably good advice. Although I did break it, right? Because I think you got to see a business partnership as being almost as serious as a marriage. It's got to be someone you've known a long time. It's got to be someone that you really, really trust. At the end of the day, that like, hey, whether we're supposed to be splitting this, in thirds, but if you get 40 and I get 30, we're not going to be upset about a few dollars here or there. We're going to trust each other. We're not going to screw each other. We're going to treat each other like we're family, and not everyone. That means, so to me, I think going into business with family can be a really good way to go about it if it's someone that you really trust and connect with. And then I've actually brought on new partners over the years because the licenses are so valued. So to buy my second store, I actually they wouldn't sell me 100% of it. So they still own a piece today. So I have two partners that were essentially strangers. And that certainly made me uncomfortable. And there have certainly been uncomfortable interactions over the years. But it's something that I had to do to make the business work. And we've been able to make it work, and with very clear expectations and very clear understanding. And it also helps that the business has been successful, right? When someone's saying, hey, I don't really want you to do anything, just cash these checks every month, that's usually a pretty easy sell, which is essentially what I want from my partners.
Just get out of the way. Let me do my work.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I love the idea of one is sometimes defying the odds is not listening to the rules, right? To break the rules, so to speak. Right, Victor?
Yeah, like the status quo. He's trying to defy the odds in so many ways there. I mean, I think everything that he was saying, he's defying the odds in so many ways, breaking the stereotypes from the, just doing business with family, showing how that can be successful. There's a lot of good nuggets here.
And I like the idea of treating each other as family anyways, because business is serious enough that whoever your partner is, right? Talk about taking that advice of like, don't do business with family and friends, actually turning it on its head and saying like, whoever you're doing business with, whoever your business partners are, treat them as family, treat them as friends, create a level of trust that actually binds you together through hard times, right? Victor, I'm curious, going back to your background, can you talk a little bit more about like, because when you went inside, when you got incarcerated, marijuana was not legal, and selling marijuana was a felony, I believe, in Washington State. Can you talk about like the business and how does that differ from like your experience on the other side?
Are you talking about just like the street sales and
Yeah, exactly. Because
all of
and,
that?
and maybe you could share a little bit more about your background of like why would you be a credible messenger about that, if at all? What your experience in the background of just knowing about things like that?
Are you referring to just getting into the space or?
Yeah, just whatever. I mean, I'm just curious in terms of business wise. How does that if that resonates at all?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, that's like what I've seen, and a lot of people in the neighborhood, they're just like smoking cannabis, walking around, and it was a norm. You see that at like some of the parks, and you're always curious and interested. And yeah, eventually I found myself smoking it, started selling it, and large quantities. And I don't know, it was a lot different back then. Like, yeah, it was just street people were getting it. There wasn't like no stores or anything. So getting out of prison, after this 10-year prison sentence and seeing all of these dispensaries set up is just like, yeah, this is something like we dreamed of, way back in the day that we wish we could have done, but we had to do it, in a legal structure. And it is a lot different. And yeah, I commend Andy for his journey and his willingness to take a risk and to this small business entrepreneurship world, and it paid off. But yeah, I wish something of it was available, back in the day when I was, in my entrepreneurship criminal days, and trying to go to a better route. But now, with the criminal background and all of that stacked against me, that's probably not going to be likely. So sure there are going to be opportunities in the future for some of these other states to pass cannabis laws. There's going to be a lot of opportunities that happen, but yeah, thinking about how much has changed over the years is just wild. But glad Andy was able to catch the wave here.
If I could just interject with a quick plug about Washington State's social equity program, I think it's very interesting. So they've had a program to essentially grant new cannabis retail licenses to what they call social equity candidates, and one of the criteria is people who were unfairly incarcerated for marijuana related offenses. So if you were incarcerated for marijuana, you will get more points in this. It's a very complicated ranking system, and I'm certainly not an expert in it. But they're essentially issuing new licenses to people, and one of the criteria is that you've been wronged by the war on drugs. And this is sort of, to give you a leg up in a system, and it will be very valuable for the people who get them. Again, I don't know the details, but if you're interested, you should look into that.
Love that.
Wow. Well, I'm sure you're no longer in Washington, so you don't count, Victor. But who knows? Maybe that pays to read small print. And thank you so much. I'm actually gonna take a look at it myself and maybe put the information about the Washington State Social Equity Program in our notes. I think that's a really valuable resource. Thanks, Andy. And that's really interesting. So going back to like running a business and running a small business, whatever it is, right? You have to defy the odds all the time. Can you tell us some more stories of like some of the hard things that have happened and how you used your ingenuity to defy the odds when that happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of long-term hard things which are going to be pretty boring to talk about, right? Rise in competition or the way the market changes, and it's like you make a lot of tiny, small, little changes to keep up with that. The more interesting stuff, I think, is the short-term big shocks to the system. I think, trying to stay open in a snowstorm. I got to tell you, when it snows, you'd be like, all right, people aren't going to make it out. But I'll tell you, no matter how bad the snowstorm is, people will show up to the door of my store expecting and wanting to buy some cannabis. Like, oh, it's a snow day, I can't go anywhere, I'm going to go home and smoke. And trying to keep that open. My employees don't live always right near. They don't always live in places that are plowed. They're not, frankly, they're not as motivated to come into work as the people who really want to buy marijuana. And it's not safe for some of them. So trying to manage that, I've definitely, had people with a bigger car, or I've done it with myself where, I got like a big 4-wheel drive car and drive and shuttle everybody into work that day. We've done, various other things. I've had people get hotel rooms near the shop so they can stay overnight if it's a big snowstorm, if that's what they want to do. We will go pretty hard to stay open. I think another challenge is a lot of the robberies. I know this isn't a tribal, but we've had a lot of robberies, and it freaks people out. And I know there was a period of time, it kind of goes in waves, right? Because it's not a super profitable thing to do. The people who rob our stores, they get like $1,000, and it's four guys. Like, you're gonna have to do that again like next week. That can't be a career. It's not like the big score you retire off of. I don't know what they're expecting, but and you're not going to get away with it forever. So there's a time where it gets popular, and then it happens pretty regularly, and then a couple people get arrested, and then it gets out of the popularity. So dealing with that, making people feel safe, trying to be safe. Luckily, nobody's ever been hurt in a robbery at one of my stores, but that's always a big challenge. And the various things that we do from a security point of view, right? Because we want to make it welcoming for most of our guests, right? 99.9% of people who come in aren't going to rob the place, and you want to make them feel comfortable. But you also need the security measures in to stop that 0.1%. And you need to do it in a way that doesn't cost so much that you can't stay open. And finding that balance is always really tricky. And it's particularly emotionally charged, when there is a situation where people are feeling unsafe. So that's always a challenge, and always a challenge that hits you at 3 a.m. when you get a phone call, or 10 o'clock at night or something.
No, that is so true. I like what strikes me about what you just said is your attention to your people, right? So you're taking care of people when you are in a small business. One of the ways you defy the odds is you take care of people. You don't just say, "Hey, you have a responsibility, get here." It's your job, right? You actually go above and beyond of like, "Hey, you know what? We need to be open. How can I help? Like, what can I do?" And going as far as, being the truck driver of coming in and bringing your employees to work, or paying for their hotel room. So then they have a utility and ability to actually get there. And then making them feel safe. Where does that come from? Can you talk a little bit about your background? Like, you've never done retail, you've never done stores until this thing, but you clearly have learned how to do it right somewhere, you and your partners. So where's that?
Yeah. I mean, so as my management philosophy, which is a lot of informed my time in the tech world, more than my time in the military world, is that people have got to want to work for you, right? You've got to show them that you care, because if you show them that you care about them, they'll care about you and they'll do the right thing. There's no amount of bullying or pushing or system of rewards and punishments that'll get people to want to work for you. They have to understand that you're a human and you see them as a human, and everything else there gets much easier if you go that way. So I think that's a super important thing. I think also there's this perception that in business, when you get robbed, the owner is only saying that they care about the people and they really care about the money. It's the money really doesn't matter. They just don't steal that much. You know what I mean? Somebody comes and robs my store for a couple $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is. Yeah, it's sort of a downer. But if somebody comes in and hurts somebody, that could be the end of your business forever. Right? Keep yourself safe isn't I'm not just saying that because I care. I mean, I do care. But even if I didn't care, it would still be the right advice. Listen, don't worry about the money, just keep yourself safe. And at the end of the day, a small robbery here or there is just not that big of a deal. Whereas, a person getting hurt could just be devastating.
Oh, without a doubt. And again, how do you protect it? I think it applies to any kind of job and any kind of environment. You just have more kind of direct ones, being in retail and being in cannabis industry. But how do you protect your people, right? And how do you show them that you care? Because again, you can't. No amount of money is going to make them. With all due respect, though, when you said that you learned that in the technology industry, I don't really associate technology industry with that mentality.
Well, I mean, I think again, I don't want to talk about the whole industry, but at Google, there's a big focus on as a manager in manager training at Google, which I've been through many times. There's a big focus on care about your people, do right by your people. That's the most important thing. It's not a safety issue necessarily. There's nobody's that's unsafe at the Google office. I mean, I'm sure there's situations where it happens, but it's pretty rare. Nobody's worried about that. But like, if it's about sort of showing people you care, taking an interest in them, those important steps that really have nothing to do with technology or any type of job that make people want to work hard and want to enjoy coming to work, right? I want people to come, and it's, you can't make every job fun, right? Like at the end of the day, it's a retail job. People come in and out. Some of them are going to be unreasonable. It's a tough job. It's open late at night, early in the morning. It's a grind. But like, as much as I can, I want to make it fun. I want to make it interesting. I want them to feel engaged and care and meaningful about their job. And it's not easy. And there's only so much I can do. I don't always succeed. But I think it's a really important thing to endeavor towards in anytime you're in charge of someone. Make them like you and like coming to work.
That's awesome. Victor, you got questions for Andy going forward?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, I'm in the tech industry as well, and I do think that a lot of the tech companies do care about their workers. They give them, paid time off to take care of, family, business, or just, personal and business needs. Yeah, they've been super supportive in my last 4 years of tech, so can relate to that, Andy. But yeah, so I think the question that comes from mind is just like from your first store to your fifth store, like what was your vision back then? Did you have a vision of opening, the 5 stores? How did the second, third one come about, and what was that process?
Sure. I absolutely did not have a vision. In fact, one of what I think would have been one of my best employees left when I had one store because he was assistant manager and he was really, really good. Like he should have been manager and he managed another store before. He was overqualified. And I said, I don't think we're ever going to open a second store. So I don't, and the manager I think is going to be here forever. And he actually still works for me, the guy who was ahead of him. So I didn't think we'd ever open a second store. And that's what we told someone. And I think 6 months later, we opened a second store and this other guy would have been the perfect manager. And I'm bummed that he doesn't work for me anymore. So I still worked at tech for a long time. So I worked at tech. I worked at Google when the store opened. I worked at Google until the store was open for about 7 years. And about 3 or 4 years, the store was making more than I was making at Google. But I still worked at Google because, it's a very volatile industry and I didn't want to give up my very long and tech career. So the first store was doing really well. And actually the second store, I wouldn't say it fell into my lap. But someone else actually did the work. And this is the partner the stranger partners I talked about earlier. They actually reached out to me. They reached out and they did pretty well. They reached out to the 10 highest income stores in the state. And they said, all right, we have this license, but we can't use it. And we don't have the money to move it. So we're looking to partner with somebody. We're looking to sell or get a partner. And they went to the 10 biggest retailers in the state. And I was one of those. And they met with me and they sort of sold me on the idea. And I was like, you know what? I think I could do this. And then I ended up partnering with them after some back and forth to open up a second store. I don't want to speak for them, but I think it's certainly been the best business deal they've ever made in their life. And it's been a great deal for them. And they showed up, right? Their story is almost even more interesting, right? Because they handed it off. They had this thing that was kind of not really worth anything. They found a good partner and they kind of got me into opening a second store that I really had no intention of doing. And it's been great for everybody. It's been great for me. It's been great for them. So they kind of, pushed me into it. Then the third and fourth store, that was sort of a great opportunity. There was two very successful stores in Bellevue. The owners wanted to sell for unrelated personal and business reasons. And they sold at what I thought was a great price at the time. And I just had to jump on it. And it was a great price and a great deal.
Awesome.
No, that's so cool. And I think the idea of partnerships, it comes up again and again as we're kind of delving into this idea, Andy, of what does it take to defy the odds? Because you have a story, like even your partners have a story. We've talked to Dredd, the founder of F3. We've talked to Ginny. We're talking to several other people going forward. And there's a theme coming up again and again. That's what we're really after. We're after like digging through stories and finding real nuggets of things that are consistently important, so then they can be applied. All right. So as we're going through, if you are just coming in and listening, this is Defying the Odds podcast with Leonovsky and Victor Sauceda, and we have Andy here with us, who is a small business owner of Higher Leaf and stores here in Washington State. I believe you are one of the most successful cannabis companies in Washington State. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, one of.
Yeah. And we've been just talking about Defying the Odds and some of the takeaways, some of the things that we all can learn that is kind of common for us. So why don't we just talk through that? Like, what are some of the lessons that can be applicable from this experience to anyone who is trying to define their own odds?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I talked early in in our conversation about how hard it was to find a location. And that might sound like a small thing, but it's a very hard thing to do, at least on Seattle's east side, because of all the rules and restrictions. And I remember very early on when we were like ready to give up, saying to my wife, I was like, this is really hard to find a location. But you know what? That's probably a good thing, because it means that when we get up and running, we're not going to have a lot of competition. Right. And I think that's a pretty important thing to always remember. Like when you hit these challenges as a business owner, right, or really as an employee, right, if you're doing something hard, it probably means you're doing something that's, especially if that's going to be valuable. Right. Like if you're doing something easy that anyone can do, that job probably isn't going to pay that much, or that career isn't going to pay that much. If you're doing something that's difficult and necessary and useful for society, well, it's going to be harder. There's going to be fewer people who can do it. And I think that certainly applies in my industry, because the East Side is probably the hardest area to locate a cannabis store in Washington. And if you look through, again, in my industry, if you look through the entire state, if you go to places where it's easy to find a location, the businesses don't do as well, right? Because there's more of them, and there's less investment in those. Whereas if you go to places where it's really hard, they do a lot better. So I think the harder it is to get your foot in the door at something, the probably more worthwhile it is.
Nothing comes easy in life. Yeah, I like that advice.
How does that apply to you, Victor? I know for those of you who are just tuning in to our podcast, Victor and I have known each other for about 7 years now, and I met him while he was still incarcerated, and I was teaching a course called CEO of Your New Life for Defy Ventures and he was one of my first students, one of the first graduating class. And how does talk about the idea of the barriers to entry, right? This idea of like, if it's too hard, right? If it's hard to deal with and get in, that's actually a good thing, because less people are going to be able to do it and you're going to come on top. Like, talk about that. Yeah. Well, what about the Defy the Odds? Defy Ventures program, and you getting into it, and the barriers to entry. For those who don't know, Defy Ventures is one of our sponsors, and it has a program that teaches entrepreneurship, employment skills, and personal empowerment skills in a 6 to 7, 10-month program, intensive, inside prisons. It's in at least 9 states now, in over 25 prisons. And we have 2 of those programs now in Washington State. We'll talk a little bit about that. Actually, Andy had a chance to go and see it for himself. But like, what was it for you? How did you end up in that, and how does that lesson resonate for you?
Oh, so in the prison setting, I would say like applying for the Defy Odds program. I forget how many people applied for the program. I know there was a lot that we had to.
Yeah, over 80. Yeah, over 80 people. Well, over 160 actually went to the information, right? And it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a huge pool, right? And this is out of, a population of, I think, 800 prisoners inside the facility. So it was a lot to be able to be selected to what we end up going with. I think the 26 that graduated, but we started with more even then. And through the program, people were dropping out because it was getting tough. We were talking about, emotional intelligence, going through, some of these business concepts and things that we could learn to better ourselves. But you see that a lot of people were also dropping out, and you had to have the perseverance to stick it through and just see the end game. And it was, defying the odds in so many ways, and you have to put in the work and show up every day. It wasn't easy. There was times, same thing in there where I didn't want to, wake up, or I didn't want to do the homework, but I had to, not only push myself, but the others around me to finish the program. And we're all better because of it. And just, I'm appreciative of, the perseverance that I had personally to not give up through this experience. Thankful for the Defy Ventures program, and what has had or how it's had an impact on my life. But Andy, I'd love to hear your experience from the other side, coming in as a guest, of what you thought about the Defy Ventures program briefly, and what that experience was like for you.
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously, I think it's a great program. That's kind of why I've spent a couple days involved with it at this point. And they're full long days. You meet the bus at like 6 a.m, you get home at like 10 p.m. It's a long day. But I think it's a great program. I think as a society, I feel like I don't think I don't think the justice system in America is particularly just. I'll say that. And I don't think the incarceration system does much for rehabilitation. I think when they have their list of priorities, it's very low down on that. And I think that's not right. And I feel like I think Defy Ventures does a lot to right that wrong. And that's why I support it as an organization with my time and my resources. The experience itself is also kind of a magical experience, right? This isn't a population that I normally connect with. I don't think a lot of people connect with. Right. It's easy to see and read stories about how America incarcerates more people than any other country in the world as a percentage. And you can say, well, that's wrong. But it's hard to see, when you see it up in person. I have a couple things that really hit me hard. The first thing that really hit me hard is I walked in the visitor room, and you see all the playthings for kids. And I've got 4 kids. And at that moment, you realize, wow, I never really thought about it. But obviously, some of these people have kids. And here they are, and they have this, what looks like a nursery, it looks like a pediatrician's office for people to connect with their kids. And these people are people who maybe connect with their kids once a week, once a month, once a year. I don't know how often, but probably not that often. And you have people who work too hard to like, oh my God, I didn't get home to see my kids till 7 p.m. I can't imagine what that's like to see your kids once a month. And then you see there's the little teenager play area things too. People have teenagers, and it's hard to connect with teenagers to begin with. So there's just some real challenges that really hit home. They are real people, right? They're not a statistic. They're real people with kids and families and wives and lives. And they're, I'm sure there's some of them that don't want to reform themselves, but there are a lot who really do. And in some ways, the system's going to make it harder for them. So yeah, I think that was really the other thing that really hit me. First thing in the morning, one of the icebreakers was, chat with the person next to you about what your favorite breakfast food was. And it seems about as innocent as an icebreaker as you could come up with. And the guy that I was sitting next to started crying immediately. I was like, wow, this is going to be a lot more intense than I thought. And then he's talking about how long it's been since he's had a cinnamon bun. and again, there wasn't that much crying the rest. I mean, there was some, but to have that moment, literally the first 30 seconds into the icebreaker, was really a gut check to me, just how serious this is, because these people don't have access, and they don't have people coming in to visit them. Some of them have visitors, some of them don't. Some of them, this program is the only connection to the outside world. It's the only reminder of like, hey, there's a life after this, and you're going to want to make it great, and you have that opportunity. And for me to come in and show them that and convince them and help them with that is a very rewarding experience.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear it from a civilian's perspective. Yeah, for me, it's just normal to see kids with their children inside the visiting room, and that was like something. But a lot of people didn't have that experience, as you mentioned as well. They do have kids, and they don't get to see them for that amount of time, so that could be difficult in its own right. So I love that you just have this kind of innate thing that's built inside of you to care for humans and look at others as humans, as you're talking about treating your employees and connecting with them as humans. Here you're going into a land unknown to you, and still trying to compare them and say like, hey, at the end of the day, these are humans. You're still noticing these things of these playgrounds for the kids, and like, yeah, this is just a normal thing. And it's wild that we have this setting inside of our institution, but it's often overlooked if you're not actually going inside the facilities and seeing what's happening. So thank you for even taking the leap of faith to step into discomfort and go into the facility.
Yeah, and your story is certainly an inspiration of that people can be better and be very successful after their time in. Even if it's not everybody, it could be more people. Whatever number it is, it could be more, and it should be more.
It can and should be. I am also struck by the things that kind of stuck out to you from that whole day, because there are so many things that can be of great value and insight, and like the ones that you mentioned are really powerful, because children, it's all about role models, right? That's what doing 13 years. I've been going into the prison for 13 years now. I've literally been going to the prison longer than Victor was in it. So, but the idea is like, they don't see the role model. If the role models are not there, how would you know that there's life afterwards, right? How can you actually get better? I think there is a real takeaway here, and we talked to Dredd about that too, the power of mentors, and with Ginny about the power of community. Like, one cannot just pull themselves out of a gutter. You got to have someone else to help you there, and have role models to support that. So I think that's the crucial role, and that's kind of like the lesson that I think is out there. That I get out of what you said is that to just show up. Again, showing up is really important. Andy, you showed up. You went through the process, and getting in is a lot harder this way. It's like, and but getting out is a lot easier. And the idea is that it matters. It genuinely matters. We just had Defy Ventures had just had a graduation at Stafford Creek, and it was a really powerful experience. And we're going to have another one coming up. Defy Ventures is going to have another one coming up on March 22nd, 2025 at Monroe. I'll put the link to Defy Ventures website and where one can register once it goes live, for those of you who are listening. And if you want the opportunity to be a mentor for these men inside Monroe Correctional Complex. And but the idea here is that whatever our systems are, right, whether it's incarceration or not, whether it's your business or the financial system or whatever, we have the opportunity to defy the odds by following relatively simple rules. They're not easy, but they're simple rules. And I just wanted to summarize before we end, like what I heard you talk about, Andy. And one of them was to show up. You got to show up, whether it's to Home Depot during snowstorm, or during application for a license, or going to prison. The other one is like, you know, the hurdles that other people like, embrace the hurdles, embrace the challenges as opportunities, because others won't. Others will stop and not do this, right? I think that's the number one that I kind of got from talking to you, is like, you show up and then you go through it and you do the best you can, right? But you just don't stop, right? And then I love how you care for people. Show people that you're with, that you care, and treat them as family, especially when you're doing partnerships. Like, it's not about doing partnership with family members or not. It's about treating your partners as family and trust once you get it, once you have it, if you want to succeed, if you want to survive, right? And and the idea is, like, basically support others who can't. Give people the tools. You can't just be focused on oneself. So I don't know. Do you have a kind of a parting thought for us as we kind of wind down this podcast about defying the odds, and maybe this experience of, talking to us about it? Like, is there anything else that kind of stands out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my parting thought would be, you talk about, I think, talk about sort of Victor's experience, which I do think is inspirational. It's like, I think the important thing, right, if you look at where Victor was at, he wasn't at a great place, but he was moving forward at a good speed, right? Where you're at, it's not important. It's where at speed you're moving. And I think, to continue to show up and continue to make those changes. And I think that'll be true. That'll be true as of my life and your life and Victor's life, as much in 10 years as it was 10 years from now, as it was 10 years ago. And doesn't mean you always need to be stepping on the gas, but it's that how fast are you going that really matters.
Whoa. Yeah. Way to go to give us the nugget, the best nugget at the end. It's not where you're at. It's the speed with which you're moving forward. And whether it might, I think that's really powerful. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much, Andy, for your time. I know how valuable it is. You have given us such amazing information. I'm honored to know you as a friend and as someone, as a mentor in some ways, and to see your business succeed. And I know now why. So thanks for defying the odds and teaching us how to defy ours. Victor, what do you got for parting thought?
Yeah, no, thank you, Andy, and thanks for the words. Really appreciate it. But yeah, you just have to continue to push forward. Look back at my life, just the same way I asked you about, just from your first store to your fifth store. I look back from my first year out to my fifth year out, and could I have planned any of it? I couldn't. But every day I just showed up, put in the work, and try to defy the odds in any way that I could. And it's relatable, and as you mentioned, it is going to be 5 years, 10 years. If you show up and continue to put in the work, it's going to pay dividends, because a lot of people will give up at that first sign of rejection. So you have to have that perseverance to stick it through. But yeah, thanks for being here, Andy.
Yep, thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Well, Victor, what did you think about this interview?
Andy's always been good. I remember we seen him a couple of years ago in person at his house, and it's been a lot's happened since then. But he's sprinkled us with a lot of golden nuggets, and he has had just an amazing story and journey, and was willing to share that with us. Really powerful podcast today.
Yeah, man, I'm pumped. And I think for me, the thing that really sticks out for me from what he said is really, how do you redefine barriers, right? Redefine hurdles. And constantly we have them. Every one of us have them every day, right? And it's how we see it. And the idea is like, hey, other people might find that difficult and quit. So why don't we not quit, right? There's nothing inherent about staying the course. It really is a decision. And right. I think I
think he's just having to find ways to make it work. Like a lot of it felt like he was kind of just figuring out as he was going in, and just kind of reading the fine detail and trying to figure it out all on his own. But it did end up paying off by taking those risks. And yeah, he did say, you know, just like doing the hard stuff, a lot of people would just, you know, back out and give up. This seems to be a case for a lot of things, you know, just in life in general. So I think that was really important to highlight, is like, just don't give up in those moments, because, you know, it is going to pay off. You know, a lot of people do give up because of those reasons. And if you do put in that work, that extra work, is going to get you those results that you need at the end. So continue to show up.
Yeah. Well, that concludes that's all the time we have. That concludes our episode with Andy Honig, and I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you're ready to defy the odds in your life. If you do and you enjoyed this podcast, please share, like, subscribe, and let us know what you think, because we're going to continue this journey, and we are going to continue to defy our own odds. And I hope you do too.
All right, y'all have a good weekend. Stay tuned next week.
All right, let's defy the odds.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Defying the Odds.
We hope you found inspiration, insight, and maybe a new way of looking at the challenges in your own life.
Remember, defying the odds is a mindset, and you have what it takes to overcome anything.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe.
Until next time, keep pushing forward, stay resilient, and never stop defying the odds.